Hey guys, Stay Patient here, and today I wanted to talk a bit about the PS4 Pro. So there's been quite a lot of negativity around this console, around the announcement of it and the details that have been talked about. And I wanted to cover one of those aspects today. I'm not going to talk about all of them because we'll be here all day. But the one I want to cover is the fact that the PS4 Pro doesn't contain a 4K Blu-ray drive. So in other words, it can't play the Ultra HD 4K Blu-ray movies. Now, a lot of people are saying that this is really strange to them because Sony are so, heavily involved in the movie industry. They developed Blu-ray technology, and so why wouldn't they include a 4K Blu-ray drive in their 4K gaming system? Well, for me, the fact that Sony are so heavily involved in the movie industry, and the fact that they are behind the development of the Blu-ray technology, that kind of answers that question for us. And I'll kind of go on to explain what I mean by that. Because if you look back over the previous generations of Sony consoles, and Microsoft consoles for that matter, the PS2, obviously that was a DVD player. And that's one of the main reasons why it sold so many copies or so many units and is the biggest selling home console of all time. The PS3 generation saw the PS3 cost more at the beginning of its lifespan because it contained a Blu-ray drive. Now what that tells us is that Sony aren't afraid to charge a bit more for a system if it's future-proofed, because at the time, Blu-ray wasn't the go-to format for viewing movies, it was DVD. Blu-rays were kind of an unknown quantity, no one really cared about them, and a lot of people thought it wouldn't take off. The Xbox 360, which released a year before the PS3, had an HD DVD drive. Now, if you look back through history, you'll see that although the PS3 did struggle to begin with, it had some teething problems and it didn't sell as well as the Xbox 360, partly because the 360 had a year's head start, so all those people who wanted to see next-gen gaming had to buy a 360 because the PS3 wasn't available yet. But in time, largely because of the inclusion of the Blu-ray drive, the PS3 caught up with the 360 despite having a year deficit. It had a kind of handicap of 1 year at the beginning of the cycle. But like I say, it caught up with the sales numbers of the 360 because HD DVD died a death, it was gone, forgotten about, and Blu-ray sort of emerged as the new standard for viewing movies on physical media. Now you can see from this sort of look back through history that, as we've already mentioned, Sony aren't afraid to charge a bit more for a system if they've included something that they know is going to be the standard for games or movies or whatever the case may be within a few years' time. They're brave like that because they can kind of dictate where movies go. They're behind the development of the Blu-ray technology, so they knew that Blu-ray was going to be the next standard. They knew it was going to beat HD DVD. So they didn't mind charging that bit more, making sure that each PS3 had this Blu-ray drive in it. But now this generation, obviously they've got this PS4 Pro coming out, which supports 4K, or at least close to 4K. It's not native, but it's, upscaled to 4K basically. But this time they've decided not to include the 4K Blu-ray drive for movies. Now there's got to be a reason for that, because we've seen from how they've conducted their development cycle for previous consoles that they do put in the latest technology if they know that it's going to be worthwhile doing so. So there's got to be a reason why they're not doing it now. It's got to be that they know, because they're so heavily involved in the movie industry, they know that 4K Blu-ray isn't going to be the next go-to standard. It's not going to break through in the way that Blu-ray did. Now, again, we've seen Xbox make a different decision, just like they did with HD DVD last generation. They're now going with 4K Blu-ray, but we've seen from their past decisions when it comes to movie players that they don't know the movie industry like Sony do. They know computing, and they're pretty good with gaming as well, but they aren't involved with the movie side of things. So if Sony have decided to not include a Blu-ray player, a 4K Blu-ray player, that is literally their baby, that's like what they've developed, they're behind the creation of Blu-ray in the first place, then obviously they know that it's not going to be the next big thing. And a lot of that's probably down to the fact that everyone's leaning towards streaming now. So they've made a system that's going to have apps for Netflix and I believe Amazon and I'm not sure about Sky, but it's going to have all these streaming apps that are going to be able to stream 4K content. And that is going to be the next go-to medium. And a lot of people are thinking, well, yeah, but I like physical medium. I like buying movies on Blu-ray. But although I'm not a tech head, from what I've read, it sounds as if a 4K Blu-ray is basically upscaled to 4K. It's not actually native 4K. So if that's the case, then watching a normal Blu-ray that's not technically 4K on a 4K TV that upscales, which most 4K TVs do, then you're going to be getting the same experience, which means the actual 4K DVDs or Blu-rays themselves are kind of superfluous. They're not needed. Because if it's only upscaling the Blu-ray to 4K, then your TV can do that for you. Now, some of you watching this, if you are tech heads, I'm not at all. But if you're watching this and that's incorrect, I'm very happy for you to correct me on that, because I'm not 100%, but I have read people who seem to know what they're talking about making that statement. And I thought it's very interesting, because if that is true, then that would totally explain why Sony are backing away from 4K Blu-rays, because they know that if you've got a 4K TV, then you're going to get the same image as if you had a 4K Blu-ray. The other big thing to talk about is cost. Now, we already mentioned how the PS3 cost quite a lot when it first launched because of the Blu-ray drive. Now, it was worth Sony adding in the Blu-ray drive because it paid off in the long term. People were willing to pay enough to get the PS3 system because other Blu-ray players were so much money. You could pay thousands on a Blu-ray player at the time. But obviously now they're viewing it as not worth the money because it costs a lot to add in a 4K Blu-ray drive. Now, what that means is that Sony have been able to keep the cost of their PS4 Pro down, and this is actually one of the main positive things that people have taken away from Sony's conference, is the price. Now, if they'd come out and said it's going to be so much, it's going to play 4K Blu-rays, it's going to play games in what's close to 4K, but then they'd come out and said, it's $500, $600, $700, people would have gone nuts. They would have said, why do I have to pay more for a 4K gaming system just because Sony have decided to put a 4K Blu-ray drive in it? Because most people are going to be streaming, or they're going to stick with normal Blu-rays and let their TV upscale the image to, better than HD. So if they'd come out with this massively high price point because it contained this 4K Blu-ray movie player, people would have been much more angry than they are now, and people are getting annoyed with the fact it hasn't got this player. But you have to remember that the price point is based on the fact that it doesn't have that player. Now, I read a comment someone made on another video. He said that he knew a friend of his works at Microsoft, and although there hasn't been a price decided upon, when it comes to the Scorpio, which is out in a year's time, this comment I read on a YouTube video, he said, my friend works there, and although they haven't decided on a price for the Scorpio yet, he wouldn't be surprised if it ended up being around $750. Now, of course, I'm not telling you that the Scorpio is going to be $750, but it wouldn't surprise me, because the 4K Blu-ray drive would cost a lot of money to include in every single console. And like I said, if they'd included it in the PS4 would have been a lot more money and people would have been outraged. Now, just imagine in a year's time, we've got the PS4 Pro coming out now in like a month or two. After it's been out for a year, it's currently sat at $400, £350. After a year's gone by, that price is going to have come down, even if it's only by $50 or £50, whatever. It's going to be relatively cheap. It's about on par with what the PS4 was when it first released, but it's much more powerful. Not as much of a leap forward, of course, as the Xbox One Scorpio is from the original Xbox One. That's partly down to the fact that the current Xbox is quite weak in comparison to the current PS4. But think forward to a year's time, the PS4 Pros come down in price. Next Christmas, when people are looking at buying a sort of new top-of-the-range console, with both consoles having been released, the Pro may be sat at around £300, maybe $250 by then. You'll probably get some special offers over the Christmas period, so you'll probably get it for around $250, I'd say. And the Xbox One Scorpio comes out, and they announce the price that it's $600. Now, straight away, PS4 wins that. PS4 wins hands down. People are going to look at the comparison, and yes, the Scorpio has more power in the graphics card, has more power in the processor, it has more of everything basically, and it is a more powerful system, or will be when it comes out, based on the specs that we've been sort of given so far. But due to that extra power and the extra components that go into it, and largely due to the 4K Blu-ray drive, it's going to be very expensive. And if it sits at double the price of the PS4 Pro, which one's going to win? It's just hands down, it's going to be PlayStation again. And based on the fact that there's already a huge user base on PS4, based on the extra power that it had on launch, and the fact that, you know, it's the go-to console at the moment, people kind of gravitate towards it because their friends are playing it. They know there's going to be a lot of people playing all the games they want to play on it. It seems to be more social to me. I've got an Xbox One and it's a good console, but, you know, there is much more activity on the PS4. So people have gravitated towards that. And that's going to play into the Pro's favour, especially as well with the fact that it's out a year earlier. So I think you've got two types of people. You've got those who want to have the best of what's available at the moment. They want to experience games at their best. People like me, you know, I work as a gamer, so I'm doing it a lot. I like to know that I'm experiencing it as well as I can on the system that I want to play on. Obviously, I know PCs are much more powerful, but I'm on PlayStation, you know, that's where I work. I'm a trophy hunter, I run a trophy service, and I run a YouTube channel. So I'm the kind of person who wants to know I'm playing the best possible hardware I can within the console or PC family that I want to be part of. So I'm going to go out and buy a PS4 Pro because it's available a year before the Xbox. There will be a lot of people who will think, you know what, I would like one of these new 4K systems. And to be honest, it would make sense for them to wait until the Xbox One Scorpio is released, partly because it will allow them to compare them like for like, but also because in a year's time, 4K TVs are going to be more affordable. So those people are probably going to wait until next Christmas. But when next Christmas comes around, you'll have the PS4 Pro at an even cheaper price than it currently is set to release at. And you'll have the Scorpio just releasing, so it's at the highest price it will ever be at, and having a Blu-ray drive that's going to cost a lot of money to install in each unit. And it's just going to end up being so high priced that people aren't going to consider that small amount of extra power to be worth hundreds of dollars more. So that's my take on it. I think it needed to be discussed, you know, the whole idea that the current Xbox One S, although a lot of people are saying, you know, why would you buy a PS4 Pro when you've got the One S, which can play 4K movies? Well, you know, it's not a 4K gaming system, so that's the difference. You know, the PS4 Pro is the first 4K gaming system from Microsoft or Sony. It's not fully 4K, but it's as good as, and people who've played it have said it looks amazing. So I'm happy with it. I'm happy to spend my money on it. And the other thing I wanted to cover was the fact that, like I say, Sony know movies, and there's a reason they're not including a UHD 4K Blu-ray drive. And it's that fact that has led to the PS4 Pro being quite reasonably priced. The Xbox One, bearing in mind it's by a company, Microsoft, who stuck with HD DVD last generation, which is just dead, completely been and gone, no one ever cared about it. They've now made another decision on, you know, whether to include 4K Blu-ray, and I believe that's going to be the wrong decision again, because it's going to make those systems cost a huge amount more money, and by the time it comes out next year, even more people will be fully committed to streaming. I mean, streaming has already pretty much taken over from DVDs and Blu-rays. People still buy them occasionally, but you can pretty much watch any movie you want on one of the many streaming services, and it costs a lot less money as well. So within a year's time, when the Scorpio comes out, that will be even more true. People will be even more committed to streaming. And bear in mind the fact that we'll have had a year's worth of the PS4 Pro, which will have streaming services, streaming apps on it. And that will mean that companies like Netflix or services like Netflix will be leaning more heavily on the 4K content because people will have a system on which they can play it. At the moment, you know, there's not a lot of 4K content on Netflix, but that's because people don't really have the, maybe not the TV and maybe not a device that actually streams 4K. But with the PS4 Pro coming out, a lot of people will have the ability to stream 4K, Netflix will start putting out more content, and by the time next year rolls around, people will have stopped caring about 4K Blu-rays and it will all be about streaming. And it will be proven true that Sony have made the right choice when it comes to whether to include that drive or not. And I do believe, although the Scorpio is going to outpower the PS4 Pro, I do believe the Pro will still win this console war based on that price point, based on the year head start and based on the fact that they're just going to be catering more towards the movies that people want to watch and the formats they want to watch them in. So that's my thoughts on it, guys. I'm sorry I've rambled on for so long. It's been about 20 minutes, but I wanted to talk about that because so many people are viewing this as a negative, and I really don't think it is. I think it's a positive. If they'd come out and said they had the 4K Blu-ray drive, everyone would have complained relentlessly because the price would have been so much higher, trust me. Okay guys, thanks for watching. I hope this has been slightly informative. I'm not a media mogul, I'm not a tech head, but this is, what I've come across during my research. I have pre-ordered a PS4 Pro, PSVR. I've got a 4K full HDR, HDR 1000 Quantum Dot TV coming tomorrow. So, with all the research I did before deciding to go ahead and buy all that, I thought I'd share some of it with you. And I am planning some other videos on this subject as well. I'm actually going to do some talking about what kind of TV you're going to want to buy if you do decide to pre-order PS4 Pro. And also just how to calibrate your TVs, even if it's not 4K. If it's just HD, a lot of people get their TV calibration wrong when it comes to gaming. They make the wrong choices based on a lot of information online that isn't correct. And some people don't even calibrate their TV at all. So I wanted to talk a bit about that. So stay tuned to the channel. Don't forget to subscribe. I'm usually a trophy hunting channel. So if you're a trophy hunter on PlayStation, then obviously subscribe. And if you're interested in all this technological stuff regarding these new consoles, subscribe as well, because I have some more videos on the way. But for now, have a great week, guys. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you all soon.